Okay, reflections. So this is the third chapter, Civilization Under Occult Control. This is a very interesting chapter. I read it before, and it's very informative of the occult knowledge and control that's actually going on here. And he's talking about, he's first making an apology and trying to say he's not anti-American at all, but he just needs to expose um, certain secret practices involving the U.S. government, unknown to its honest citizens, and full view of the whole world. Now, I love the way he starts this chapter. He says, "Let me introduce myself. I am an incarnated being. I love that. Just as you are. Being proud to live on a planet on which there is free will, where many individual consciousnesses are presently experiencing accelerated development." And he's talking about how there's a conspiracy to steal and to sacrifice lives in order to obtain certain things. As these occult groups, I hope that they will evolve more and learn to love each other before pretending to guide others on the path of truth and wisdom. How much energy has been sent for the whole purpose of protecting renegades. Now the reign of disorder is coming to an end. The world is no longer waiting for a savior or prophet to save it from the clutches of the celestial bestiary. And he's going to talk about the celestial bestiary quite a lot in this chapter. The celestial bestiary that was forced into exile and chose to land on our planet. With each passing day, the world is waking up increasingly disenchanted by the servitude of the perpetrators of this great conspiracy. The strings have become so obvious that they no longer can be ignored. In Europe alone, we are seeing more and more corruption scandals involving politicians, and also here in America. I'm just adding that commentary. We can no longer assume the goodwill of the people who are managing the affairs of the planet. Witness, for example, the forging of official documents, the scandal of AIDS, contaminated blood, and mad cow disease. So many examples of collective responsibility, but with no responsible parties. It would not take much to suspect the population itself of being the culprit. The fact that the ministers and officials involved usually get off the hook should give us an idea. The perversity and fraudulence of the system. I love it. He kind of sounds like me. The Earth, our Earth, is the hunting ground for the flesh eaters. Ah, yeah, I love it. That's why I don't eat flesh. And the presidents and the rulers are their accomplices, willing or not. Like many of you, I am aware of the universal principle of individual growth. I know what it costs to deceive one's fellow man. And again, I'm just reading the highlighted stuff, but in this chapter there's a lot of highlighted sentences. Principles of individual growth. I know what it costs to deceive one's fellow man, because there is no harsher judgment than the higher self. I am in position to do this only because of Sam, Enki, Osiris, the eyewitness whose story I'm about to tell. One belonged to the celestial bestiary, who also known as the Jina Abul. A very long time ago, Sam was stranded with him on another planet, or another world, the planet that the Jina Abul predators called Uras. The interview in the appendix explains a source of information in the series. Okay, so I'm not really going to read that, but I will read the footnote right here. The human brain is composed of 3 different brains, the reptilian, the mammalian, and the human neocortex. The reptilian brain, paleocortex, contains the primitive structures of the brain, and as its name implies, resembles that of reptiles. This part of the brain involves the instinct, reflexes, non-affective, and drives. It is the basic survival brain, and the reaction time is immediate. As such, it is 3 times more alert than the mammalian brain and 3 times faster than the neocortex. And he's going to talk about that right now. As the transmitter of Sam, his posthumous son Hiru, I do not share the reality of the Gina of both factions, called the Usumagal, the Anuna, after affiliated races. That means I do not know the details of their strategy or their present mode of organizations, but I do have access to their secrets and to those of some. These are the secrets I am about to reveal. Long ago, everything was done to keep the human beings asleep and to give the citizen slaves the impression of being in control of their own lives. This sounds very DMT-like. Because when you go into DM space, or at least when I go into DMT space, I always meet the Watchers, I always meet the Anunnaki, I always meet the, what do you call, of the Rosicrucians and the Gnostics. They're called the Watchers, but they're also called something else. But I've seen them many times, and they do wait in those realms to instill fear in you and to never make you want to go back there again because of the knowledge that you absorb from those areas. Okay. The impression of control of their own lives. Unknown to us, we have been pressed into the service of an age-old system of the most sinister kind. This is why we are in the same predicament as the men and women of ancient times. Ish and Ishisha, or Ishasha. I don't know how to say that. Ish and Isha. Isha. Sounds like night in Arabic. Isha. In Hebrew, which is very similar to Arabic, still slaving away in the garden of the gods. You are the blind, obedient, and productive farmers of the great food factory. And I think the factory would be, to me at least, the factory would be energy, or the food would be energy. Because it seems like that is the most important thing on this planet, is the energy and how the energy is productive or not productive. And that is basically the system. Everybody has to have a job. I wonder why. It's because they want your energy. This isn't the book. This isn't in the book. This is just my commentary. The reptilian brain forms the basis of this criminal system. If by some stroke of fate your mammalian brain, the center of emotions, were to gain the upper hand, you would be of little use to these creatures, for that part of the brain is no good for calculations. Know that each human being is evaluated according to his or her daily profitability and the financial advantages that derive from this. Oh wait, this is in the book. Oh man. If you were ever to stop serving society, as it wishes, you would be placing yourself outside of the planetary system, beyond the pale of the coherent ensemble of nations of this planet. Should you dare to do this, the system would disown and despise you, and let its agents take care of you. All the same, the earthbound serf is slowly awakening and will soon be faced with a difficult choice. Will he again believe the words of the Serpent, Nahash, or those of the accomplices of the world's conspiracy? Who are these people? Are they members of the celestial bestiary, or their descendants? It doesn't matter. Anyway, they are present today, and their way of function is identical to the one of the past. The territory of Iraq, and this is very important because this is when it starts getting interesting, and he starts talking about stargates and how interdimensional travel could happen. And I think this happens within, but this can also happen with spaceships and space travel. The territory of Iraq is marked by special spots called Dirana by the Jina Abul. That is stargates. This is why the Jinabul decided to establish themselves in this part of the enormous concentration found nowhere else on Earth. And the concentration of stargates is most concentrated in the Middle East, where the war is currently, and this is what he's going to explain in the book. As the Akkadian myth Atrahasis confirms, one particular Jinabul species, the Nungal, dug out the beds of both the Tigris and Euphrates River to provide drinking water for those strategic spots. They ultimately led to the proud Mesopotamian cities in which the Jinabul monarchy was established. The 25 stargates included the 7 stargates of the Persian Gulf that are now underwater and under the control of the American military. There are Duranu in cities or sites like Baghdad, Abu Sharain, Nunkiga or Urdu, that's just the other name for Abu Sharain, Nifar or Nippur, Tel al-Mukhya, I don't know how to say that, but it's Ur, the city of Ur, and Babylon. The name of the latter city comes from the Assyrian name Babili or Babilu in the singular and corresponds with the Sumerian Kadigir, the gate of the gods, and Su-ana, the power or control of the heavens. Transposed into Sumerian syllables, the word Babili can be broken down to Ba, living being, omens, Ab, window, Ilu, to transport, raise. Together makes Ba-ab Ili, the opening that transports the living, or a stargate. The Stargate of the opening that transports living. Interestingly enough, the name Babel in Arab, he says Arab, but it's Arabic, means this gate of God. The Stargate of Babylon is one of the largest in the region and also the last to have been regularly used by the celestial bestiary. In order to use Dharana properly, one needs a specially adapted spaceship and must be able to perform the programming. I love the word programming, it's in this book a lot too. The programming necessary to establishing the destination, another gate on the same or some other planet. Then the Dharana has to be entered at extremely high speed, otherwise you would simply fly through it or lose yourself in one of the parallel universes. Most likely in one of the lower stages of core, more about that later. When the proper velocity is achieved, there is a sonic boom. This is how the Jinabul proceeded in the days of the ancient Babylon, as we can see in the following passages will tell of the sonic booms produced by aircraft thought to be flying dragons. And this is the pictures of the flying dragons and different pictures that were there. Okay. Let's see. And then he talks about different books with the same stuff in it, and like different references from different ancient books. It is said that the huge dragons dwell around the Tower of Babel and in the desert of ancient Babylon, as well as the ruins. Their voices and roars terrify people. They're talking about spaceships, basically, flying dragons, flying serpents. And they have a few quotes about that. Each planet has any number of dharana, or openings, or stargates that lead directly to temporal vortices, permitting anyone to travel from one point into the universe to another at speeds above that of light. In these tunnels, the notion, and I really think you could also do this with your mind or your consciousness, not just spaceships. And I think this is the missing key that a lot of these people that are very into ufology and aliens forget, is you can take DMT, you can take mushrooms, you could meditate, there's so many ways. But it would be cool to be in a spaceship. In these tunnels, the notion of time ceases to exist, so they act like galactic highways. As you will see in my story, these stargates permit one to cover immense distances in the universe between the planets or vast ground distances in the twinkling of an eye. They enable the Gina Bull, the transformers of the human genome, to land on Earth during a great battle that took place in our solar system nearly 300,000 years ago. The Gina Bull race, to which the Sam belong, traveled to what they call Gigi Irla, sparkling wheel in Sumerian, or flying saucers, if you will. The exotic vessels have been described in many legends throughout the world, and he talks about it in different texts. The text of the Amduat, the tomb of Thutmose III. We hear a voice from the oval zone after the great god passed in front of them. Sokar, the winged serpent, like the sound of thunder in a stormy sky. And they're just the Rig Vedas in India. Now come the great chariot of Vara, the wind, destruction comes with it, and thunder is its sound. The heavens he touches, making the light turn red, a proud red brilliance, making it spin on the earth. And the illustration that I showed you was from the Egyptian funerary texts of Thutmose III, and that was the goddess on the serpent going to the stars, and that's basically talking about the Stargate. And then he has, let's see, from the Hopi tradition, this was a really good one. The Kachina, the spiritual guides, can travel very fast, and in the same time it takes for me to say this, they can travel over great distances. They need only a few seconds. Their vessels fly by means of magnetic force even when they fly around the Earth. If you cut a gourd in two, you get the shape of a cup or a saucer. If you put these two parts together, you will get the shape of the vessel that were once used. We Hopi know that some of our own flew in these vessels, and that these vessels were also used in other lands. September 11, 2001 not only revived the idea of going to war against Iraq, but also used a cast iron argument to resume the project for the anti-missile shield formerly known as Star Wars. And he's going to talk about the Star Wars subject a lot, and how they changed, actually, the project from Star Wars to something else because it was just too obvious. In 1983, when the project was born, American taxpayers shelled out more than $70 billion for research linked to the development or different versions of this anti-missile defense system, providing a windfall for the weapons industry. The same pretext recently resurfaced: terrorism. According to the government of the United States, the rogue states Iran, Iraq, and North Korea were supposed to have been in position to produce intercontinental ballistic missiles since 2002. In point of fact, the same time when Operations Shock and Awe was at its height, none of these nations had any missiles that were in a position to come anywhere near the territory of the United States. International terrorism is always a good scare. An effort is being made to cause it to spread on a global scale in order to deliberately create a worldwide climate of insecurity and systematically humiliate the Muslim community in the bargain. Make no mistake, the specter of terror can also be conjured up by deliberately making the United States unpopular, thus making the world hostage to an orchestrated fear that legitimizes the use of ultra-sophisticated, if not ultra-secret, weapons of defense and dissuasion. Its stake is not only the control of the global citizens of the planet via computer technology, internet, telephone communications, insurance, banks, welfare, the postal service, but also the domination of mankind by technology worthy of science fiction thrillers. The anti-missile shields of the Reagan years had a revealing name that betrayed its real purpose, Star Wars, but then was probably deemed to, like I said, too transparent, so they changed it to the ballistic missile defense, and finally to national missile defense. Today, this toy, which officially is still non-operational, has engulfed astronomical amounts of public funds. To understand why the Earth is under occult control, you should know that it was once put into quarantine. Ever since the celestial bestiary arrived on our blue planet, the remote ancestors of the Earthlings have been constantly in the service of the elite extraterrestrial origin. Legends from the four corners of the world tell the story of the gods, often tyrannical, to whom our ancestors bought everything in order to appease their anger. And it's really funny that gods would be so vengeful and angry. Members of the celestial bestiary came to Earth, took possession of it, and exploited its mineral resources. Several factions of the celestial bestiary, whose real name is Jina Bull, were in disagreement about this land of exile and inhabitants. They fought for each other, and the human inhabitants ended up paying the price. The large majority of the Jina Bull is particularly the strain called Anuna, were in conflict with other factions who were also alien to Earth. The latter were the official planners of the universe, known as Kadistu. These planners work in the service of the Source, which we can call God. The exiled Jina Bull did not settle here because life was easier, but because they were obliged to do so. For their return to their other colonies in the universe was gradually made impossible by the intervention of the Kadistu. In the course of the millennia, and against the wishes of the Asumagal Anu faction, our human ancestors were secretly given valuable assistance by the Kadistu and by other Jina Abul who were stranded here. Only in this way did humanity achieve a semblance of freedom while still remaining under the control of their Jina Abul Asumagal Anu overlords. Today, the situation has scarcely changed. The whole of the renegades can still be felt. Humanity is still serving a corrupt system, the ramifications of which involve a highly secret government of the planet that seems to be playing with it as if it were a game of Monopoly. The stakes today are as follows. The renegades who work through their descendants and their sordid associates do not want to lose control over their valuable prisoners. I kind of felt this in my last DMT trip. It scared the heck out of me. You don't understand. Not only do you serve them by producing various material substances that make their lives pleasant and flatter their collective ego, but you also give them the means to adjust themselves to the frequency of the Earth. Without human beings, these creatures would be absolutely nothing on our planet. Without this land of exile, these creatures would not survive, for no one with any sense would take the risk of accommodating such criminals. Technological progress has advanced in leaps and bounds over the last 200 years, a unique and completely abnormal phenomena in the history of humanity. This is so unique and abnormal that it should be obvious that the human species has somehow inspired from without. The celestial bestiary is being forced to reinforce its concealment and adapt its methods of control to encounter the progress awakening of the human race. And these supposedly gods are very cunning, and I see that because they take form in so much that is part of our culture today, whether that's music or YouTube videos or anything really, movies. Today, a good half of the millennia-old worldwide conspiracy has been disclosed. It has been denounced in many books, films, articles, and the media. Control of information is one of the big things of these criminals. They ease their consciousness by regularly releasing tidbits of the occult truths and the flood of information that immerse us each day. This is a really long chapter, so I'm going to try to cut to the chase. Um, okay, so he talks about the central banks being the power and having all the power. He talks about American companies financed a large part of the Nazi economy and how that wasn't really reported on. He talks about, this is a good one. Well, the story of Commander George Earl, ambassador of Austria to Bulgaria in the spring of 1943 while he was serving Roosevelt personal naval attack in Istanbul. George Earl met the head of German intelligence, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, and basically, let's see, he's talking about Germany was not ready to catapult unconditionally as is required by Great Britain and the U.S., and was beholden to its American sponsor, seeing the Allied arms inexplorably close. Germany let it be known that W. Canaris that if the American president granted them an honorable way out, it would be prepared to accept any other agreement. Earl sent Roosevelt a letter immediately to inform him of this request, but received no response. He sent a second, again, no answer. Germany dispatched its head intelligence once more to find out how the American president had responded, but Earl was unable to give him an answer. He finally sent a high-priority message with the same result or lack of one. The two ambassadors could not imagine the German catapultation would not fit in the American plans. Roosevelt responded 2 years later on March 24, 1945, 2 months before the end of the war, by sending a letter to George Earl forbidding him to make the affair public. The vampires of international business have always made their deals at the expense of honest citizens, disseminating fear and destruction, manipulating information. And let's see, what else? There's a lot of information here, so I'm just trying to go really fast before this gets a little too long. Thinking that you are still fast asleep. Okay. He's talking about which pill you want to take, the red one or the blue one. Thinking that you are still fast asleep and taking all due precautions to protect themselves from the outside renegades. A very sophisticated defense system enables them to keep constant watch over their human slaves and what they are up to, and to respond to any incursions from extraterrestrial powers. Fear of the planners and of losing their human labor force is much too great. According to U.S. Congress stipulated, whoever has contact with extraterrestrials or their vessels can be imprisoned for up to for 1 year or fined $5,000 or both, because they don't want us contacting positive extraterrestrials that can possibly help us. This law was passed without any public debate. NASA explained that the passage of this law was only for preventive quarantine and secure measures concerning the astronauts returning from outer space, yet this law was intended for all American citizens. Oy. He has no doubt that the main reason for deploying troops in Iraq is linked to anti-missile shields. If the usurpers of the human race, seconded by the government, have taken so much trouble to develop a shield to isolate the Earth, it is crucial for them to ensure that no outside help of any kind, and that meaning benevolent help, especially on the territory of Iraq. God knows there are enough of them. Whoever controls the stargates on the planet is its master. There is fairly easy way to block these stargates, and most of the stargates on Earth were put out of commission a long time ago by the Anuna faction. and their helpers, the Miminu. The Kadistu planners took the same measures on their end to keep the criminals from escaping and spreading their misdeeds beyond the solar system. It is common knowledge that many UFO sightings occur in the vicinities of military facilities. Okay. It touched several times upon the anti-missile shield, which was initiated by the U.S. government at the behest of the secret world rulers. But which anti-missile shields are we talking about? The one supposedly has globe in what? The one supposedly has globe in the first place. Base globe. Oh, base globe. I didn't see that. Supposedly, in the first place, at least 25 stargates or greater or lesser density lie in Iraq. And he talks about the war again. And then he talks about HARP and how HARP, the so-called project, cost taxpayers $30 million. But this system, composed of an array of antennas located on the southern Alaska, hides a terrible weapon. Depending on the frequency used, either very high, just below the threshold of visible 2.8 to 19 mH, or very low, the system is able to scan the interior of the Earth, interrupt radio transmissions, affect the climate, grill any type of aircraft in the atmosphere, provoke earthquakes and explosions, and HARP. And he talks about the techniques of climate modification and how it could be used to produce extended periods of drought or storm. What else? And then he talks about GMOs. We all know about GMOs. And global warming, HARP. Here you go. Project Bluebeam. In 1995 to 1996, the Canadian journalist Serge Monast, because a lot of this is very repetitive, and I just want to skip through that. Serge Monast, one of the founders of the International Agency of Free Press, undertook a lecture tour to draw the attention of his fellow citizens to the strange Project Bluebeam, developed by a number of American institutions. The purpose of Bluebeam was to provide the capability of using a variety of technological means in case of a world crisis. Network of lasers equipped satellites and installations of the HARP type, permitting the creation of spherical electromagnetic low-frequency waves all around the planet. That's crazy. This combination would make it possible to use the Earth's atmosphere as a huge projection screen for holographic representations of objects or persons, actual or virtual, to address all of humanity directly. This almost magical use of satellites, lasers, computers, electromagnetic waves would make it possible to create a veritable virtual reality show on a planetary scale to implement mass deception of the population. The use of this type of technology may very well be a thing of the future and should not be discounted as mere fantasy. The secret rulers of the Earth, acting through the agency of the United States of America, is fully capable of manipulating the human race to keep it confined to a fabricated reality that is accustomed tailored to its fears. Let's see. I starred this, so obviously this is important. Gotta read it. This is getting so long! Let's see, the campaign of meningitis vaccinations. He's talking about vaccinations now. It disturbed me, especially, it was aimed, and he says, the new toxic bacteria and viruses that have appeared in the 1970s and 1980s, blah, 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 vaccinations in Quebec. It disturbed me, when parents, I'm going to just summarize this, when parents didn't want to vaccinate their kids, schools would in turn get the school nurses to go there and under false pretenses make them think that the vaccinations were necessary, and then kids would get sick, and the child would have physical and mental handicaps. And this was Dr. Quillane Langtot was, or I was totally butchering the name, was talking about the vaccinations were used to mark the population to be disseminated. This is possible to intervene the genetic makeup of the individuals and facilitated a systematic genocide. With it, all the persons of a certain race, group, or country could be killed, leaving the others unharmed, supposedly in the name of health and well-being for all. And these quotes are by famous, very, very famous people. The Robert McNamara, former president of the World Bank, former Secretary of State, and this was his quote. And another one, this was by the same guy, I believe. Extreme measures must be taken to reduce demographic growth against the will of the populations. Reducing the birth rate has proved to be impossible or sufficient. Therefore, the death rate has to be increased by natural means, famine, and disease. Contrary to popular opinion, this is a very old practice. For the renegades already used it in the Middle Ages. Contemporary reports mention the fact that epidemics like the plague were often accompanied by mists or fogs of toxic vapors that struck the city. And he talks about that in the Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins. It's a book in which he cited the research of William Bramley. And he talks about the plagues that were often accompanied by UFO phenomena in the Middle Ages. What else? And that's it. That's it! This was a really long one, I know, but there was so much in here, and about how the world occult government, or the occult government, have been manipulating the citizens, and how they've been doing it over and over and over again. It's just cycles of the same thing happening over and over and over again, because people are unconscious and asleep. So I'm going to get to the 4th chapter, The Language of the Stars and the Secret Code of the Rebellious Angels. Anyway, reflections. I hope that helped. I'm really tired after that one, but I'm going to keep on going. Bye, reflections.